Number 15 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Official Languages. La réunion se déroule sous forme.
Today's meeting will take place in a hybrid format, and members will be present in person or by using the Zoom application.
Situation and in light of the recommendations from health authorities to remain healthy and safe, all those attending the meeting in person should follow the directives of the Board of Internal Economy. Je remercie donc d'avance les membres pour...
I would like to thank everyone in advance for their cooperation. I'd like to remind everyone to speak slowly, like me, and clearly. If you're participating online, click on the microphone to turn on your mic. Turn your mic off when you're not talking. And with regards to interpretation, for those of you who are participating on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen to choose the original language, English or French. For those of you in the room, you just use the earpieces and the channels that you'd like to hear.
Just arise, please advise me. Please note that we may need to suspend a few minutes as we need to ensure all members are able to participate fully. Donc, conformément...
Pursuant to Standing Order 1083F and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, January 31st, 2022, the committee is resuming its study on Francophone immigration in Canada and Quebec. I would like now to welcome our witnesses. But before that, I would like to apologize for my voice that sounds like Jerry Boulet. I'll try not to sneeze or sniff in the microphone. I wanted to be here anyways, despite being sick. So first we have Charles Castonguay, retired professor in mathematics and statistics. From the Société de l'Acadie du Nouveau-Brunswick, Alexandre Cédric Doucet, president, and Mr. Ali Chiasson, executive director. And from the Fédération des communautés francophones et acadiennes du Canada, Liane Roy, president, and Alain Dupuis, executive director, and from the Société nationale de l'Acadie, Monsieur Martin Théberge, president, and Mrs. Véronique Mallet, executive director. So to all of you, you will have 5 minutes for some opening remarks. Following this, we will move on to a series of questions from the members of the Standing Committee. I will let you know when you have about a minute left. That being said, before we go to questions, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Castonguay. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
On ne vous entend pas, Monsieur Caston.
We can't hear you, Mr. Castonguay. I'm going to start the clock again. I'm so sorry. Do you hear me now? Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to share with you some thoughts that I've had about immigration and how it can contribute effectively to stabilizing the linguistic duality in Canada. Canada's official language populations are both plagued by inadequate fertility. English-speaking majority makes up for this through assimilation to English among Canada's French-speaking and non-official languages. However, Canada's French-speaking minority is further weakened by assimilation to English, and its inability to assimilate its fair share of non-official language immigrants weakens it even further. This is true in Quebec also. As a result, Canada's French-speaking minority has steadily been losing weight in Canada as a whole and Canada outside of Canada since the turn of the century within Quebec itself. These trends are expected to continue in the foreseeable future. It is high time, therefore, to change the rules of Canada's language game. A partial solution could be to bolster Canada's French-speaking minority through immigration. This would be best achieved, firstly, by increasing the proportion of immigrations of French mother tongue, as well as non-official language immigrants who are more likely to assimilate to French instead of English. Secondly, by directing them towards those regions of Canada where French-speaking minorities remain strong enough to integrate them successfully. The most appropriate regions in this respect are, in decreasing order, Quebec, New Brunswick, and then Eastern and Northern Ontario. Simply promoting Francotrope and French mother tongue immigration outside of Quebec is grossly inadequate. According to the last census, 2.5 million people who speak non-official mother tongues have assimilated to English. 2.5 million, and this includes hundreds and thousands of Francotropes. In contrast, a minuscule 14,000 had assimilated to French. The censuses have even revealed that outside of Quebec, New Brunswick, and Eastern and Northern Ontario, a majority of immigrants of French mother tongue assimilate to English as early as the first generation. Canada's French-speaking minority has dwindled by now to 20% of the total population. To help stabilize this presence, 20% of all immigration to Canada should be either Francotropic or French mother tongue. And since Quebec accounts for 90% of Canada's French-speaking population, Canada should encourage 90% of its Francotrope or French mother tongue immigrants to settle in Quebec. Only then would immigration stand a chance of contributing effectively to stabilizing Canada's linguistic duality. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Castonguay. You did it in 4 minutes. You still had a full minute left. Would you like to say anything else in these last 30 seconds? No, I would much rather discuss with the members of the committee, if you'll allow it. We'll do that with pleasure. And we're now going to give the floor to the president of the SANB, Alexandre Cédric Doucet. You have 5 minutes. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Excellent. Mr. Arsenault, members of the committee, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I'm Alexandre Cédric Doucet, and I am the president of the Société de l'Acadie du Nouveau-Brunswick, the organization that represents Acadians and Francophones in the province of New Brunswick. I'm here with Ali Chiasson, executive director of the SANB. I would like to thank you sincerely for asking the SANB to speak to the committee in the context of this study. Immigration is a particularly important area. In New Brunswick, where French is the mother tongue for about 30% of the population, immigration policies have a major role to play in maintaining the French-speaking population. It should also be noted that the Government of Canada and New Brunswick are thus required by the Charter to ensure that their immigration policies and programs do not disadvantage one community over another. At the very least, that they maintain the demographic weight of the minority community. Unfortunately, what the Acadian nation is witnessing in New Brunswick is a more disturbing reality. New Brunswick's Francophone community has not benefited as much from immigration as the Anglophone community. This is another area where the federal government has hurt Acadia by treating it the same as the rest of Canada. It goes without saying that federal immigration policies cannot foster the development of Francophone minorities without taking into account the specific linguistic composition of the provinces. New Brunswick, with a Francophone population of approximately 32%, requires permanent federal support for immigration that is tailored to the retention and development of this population. This is so because whenever the percentage of Francophone newcomers is less than the percentage of Francophones living in the province, the unique linguistic balance in New Brunswick is disturbed. For example, the federal government's target for Francophone immigration outside of Quebec is 4.4%. It doesn't speak to the specificity of New Brunswick. 4.4% of Francophone immigration, if applied to New Brunswick, is in fact an assimilative rate. Moreover, in 2014, in its action plan to foster Francophone immigration to New Brunswick, the government of New Brunswick gave itself until 2020 to ensure that the number of Francophone immigrants settling in the province respected the linguistic composition. The result, having missed its target in 2020, the provincial government has only pushed it back to 2023. With that in mind, we strongly encourage the Standing Committee on Official Languages to recommend that the Government of Canada negotiate an agreement with New Brunswick that respects the linguistic and constitutional specificity of the country's only bilingual province. In this regard, it must, among other things, consult the Government of New Brunswick and interested representatives of the English and French linguistic communities in the province and negotiate with them the adoption of a 5-year agreement on the support provided to the distinct educational and cultural institutions of these communities necessary for their protection and promotion. This 5-year agreement should cover areas of elementary and secondary education, early childhood education, post-secondary education, health, and of course, immigration. In New Brunswick, according to the reference scenario projections, by 2036, the Francophone population would be closer to 1/4 than to 1/3 of the total population. A 10% annual inflow of Francophone immigration across Canada outside of Quebec would slow this decline in New Brunswick and reach a 30% of Francophones by 2036. In doing so, over the next few years, the province would have to take advantage of a minimum federal quota of at least 15% of the target percentage of Francophone immigrations in order to maintain growth in its Acadian and Francophone populations and thus avoid decline. This increase will not be without its challenges. An increase in the number of Francophone immigrants means an increase in funding for settlement and integration services and a strengthening of Francophone support systems. More financial and human resources will have to be put in place throughout the implementation of this target to raise awareness and inform New Brunswickers about the diversity, inclusion, and multiculturalism. In sum, increasing the number of Francophone immigrants to the province would maintain or increase the Francophone population. However, the issue of reception capacity must be taken into account as it will have a big impact on the retention rate, and initiatives will therefore have to be funded in order to respond to these social challenges to promote living together. I appeal to your courage and your responsibility as statesmen and women that the future of Canada and Acadia is now being shaped. We are truly at a crossroads. It is up to you to decide which direction the Great Canadian Project will take and its distinct iteration within the linguistic minority communities. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Doucette. We are now moving on to the President of the Fédération des communautés francophones et acadiennes. I think this is your first time appearing before us as President. You have the floor for 5 minutes. Mr. Chair, members, I'm speaking to you from Moncton, New Brunswick, which is part of the traditional territories of the Mi'kmaq people. Thank you for this. I'm with the Executive Director, Alain Dupuis, who is joining us from Ottawa. I thank you for this opportunity to speak about the new progressive Francophone immigration target that was presented by the FCFA on Monday. You received a few tables from the clerk that are meant to be read with my presentation. You'll be able to follow more easily if you follow along with my tables. As you know, the federal government set a target of 4.4% of immigration admitted each year to Canada from outside Quebec be French-speaking. This target was supposed to be reached in 2008, but the deadline was put back to 2023. Over the past 18 years, very little progress has been made towards meeting this target. Annual results have rarely exceeded 2%. For 2021, they were at 1.95%. Meanwhile, the demographic weight of Francophones and Acadian communities has dropped from 4.4% in 2001 to 3.8% in 2016. And if the trend continues, it will be 3.1% by 2036. As I said, when we unveiled our catch-up target, a major shift is required. We cannot continue on this trajectory. We are in the realm of wrongs that need to be righted. This is why we have asked that the government give itself the means to reach a target of 12% as early as 2024, which will have to progress up to 20% by 2036. We didn't invent these numbers. They come from a major demographic study that was conducted for the FCFA by Sociopol. This study, which uses Statistic Canada models and data, shows what is necessary to restore the demographic weight of our communities to 4.4% by 2036. This objective, by the way, is one that the government set itself. It has been stated twice in the Action Plan for Official Languages 2018-2023 and in the Official Languages Reform document published in February 2021. Achieving this target will require a different approach to Francophone immigration. We must use all the means at our disposal. For years, the government has relied on general immigration programs, such as express entry, to try to reach the target. This has not worked. We need a Francophone immigration policy that will include specific programs and measures for specific realities. These measures must include a distinct Francophone economic immigration program that matches the needs of Canadian Francophone communities and employers. They must include specific Francophone components for the family sponsorship categories, refugee and provincial nominee programs. Finally, communities must play a leading role in the selection of Francophone immigrants. Communities should also facilitate the arrival of Francophone international students by removing barriers to obtaining visas. We also recommend that the bridge for temporary residence to permanent residence for Francophone applicants, which was put in place for a limited time last year, be made a permanent fixture. But more importantly, we need additional support for Francophone and Acadian communities to help them fully engage at all stages of immigration. Whether it is in terms of promotion abroad, strengthening reception and settlement services in French, mobilizing employers for recruitment, or developing welcoming and inclusive communities to ensure the success of those who settle here. It's been 20 years that Francophone and Acadian communities have been working hard to meet the challenge of immigration. We have demonstrated that we have the know-how and expertise to create the Francophonie of the future, a diverse and multicultural Francophonie. But this Francophonie will only exist if the government adopts this target and truly gives itself the means to achieve it. I thank you, and I'm ready to take your questions.
Merci, Madame Roy.
Thank you very much, Ms. Roy. The SNA, Mr. Theberge, the floor is yours. Hello to everyone. The Société Nationale de l'Acadie, which I have the honour of chairing, is a non-profit organisation that brings together the Francophone advocacy associations and Francophone youth associations of the 4 Atlantic provinces. The Atlantic Committee on Francophone Immigration is a regional consultative body created by the SNA to bring together all stakeholders to work together and to speak with one voice. And it's in this capacity that I stand before you today. My name is Martin Theberge. I'm accompanied by my colleague Véronique Mallet, Executive Director. Francophone immigration is essential to our development. The decline in the birth rate, the exodus, the ageing of the population, and especially linguistic assimilation are factors that can only be combated by increasing the French-speaking population, which must be the result of immigration. To this end, the SNA supports and congratulates the FCFA for its recent recommendations. Despite the urgency, the contribution of immigration to our country remains well below our needs. According to the November 2021 report of the Office of the Commissioner of Official Languages, Francophone immigrants account for approximately 7% of all immigrants in the Atlantic region, 15% in New Brunswick, and fewer than 4% in Prince Edward Island, Nova Scotia, Newfoundland and Labrador. These rates do not reflect the demographic weight of New Brunswick's Francophone population, which is 32%, nor that of the other 3 Atlantic provinces as a whole, which is 11.9%. Our governments, our 4 Atlantic governments, are fully aware of the importance of this program. They want to work with us on the nominees program, and yet to date, no province has reached its targets. As the Commissioner has underscored in the report that was recently presented, the 4% target was adopted in 2003 to halt the decline in the demographic weight of the French-speaking population in minority communities, which was 4.4% in the 2001 census. Nearly 20 years later, our demographic weight has continued to decline, while the 4.4% target, which has been pushed back to 2023, has never exceeded 2%. In Acadia, we must both attract and retain immigrants. Since the mid-2000s, a number of advances have been made. Specialised French language service for immigrants and so on. So why is Francophone immigration not increasing? There are certain administrative and governmental realities that play a negative role on Francophone immigration rates, and I'd like to highlight a few of them. International students represent a skilled and educated immigrant class in Canada. In the Atlantic region, it's estimated they account for about 1/3 of Francophone immigration. They could be much more numerous, but their applications for study permits are very often denied. Later on, the lucky ones who obtain it often find their application for permanent residency denied as well. We therefore hope that the federal government will immediately look into the reasons why French-speaking foreign students are refused and rectify the situation by increasing the number of successful applications. Almost all categories of immigrants face the same experience in applying for permanent residence. We urge the federal government to quickly identify ways to facilitate the permanent residence of Francophone immigrants in minority communities. There's also the issue of credential recognition, one of the main barriers to economic integration. Over 1/3 of the immigrants interviewed in the Atlantic region revealed that they were not working at all or not at all in their field of expertise. In this regard, since this is one of the issues being examined by this committee, I'd like to mention that the CAIF is currently working on a feasibility study for the creation of a credential recognition centre for French teachers and others. We are therefore asking that the federal government act immediately by working with professional associations to facilitate the recognition of credentials of foreign immigrants. In the Atlantic region, one cannot fully integrate without mastering the English language. Yet, over 1/4 of French-speaking immigrants who landed between 2011 and 2016 did not know enough English to sustain a conversation after less than 5 years of permanent residence. It's imperative that English language classes be more widely available. And I'll note here that studies indicate that becoming bilingual does not affect these immigrants' use of French. We therefore hope that the Department of IRCC will assist its community partners in facilitating English language courses for Francophone immigrants. In 2003, the Public Diplomacy Program, which allowed the NLS to conduct international outreach, was eliminated. No comparable program has replaced it since. It is through its diplomatic relations that Acadia manages, for example, to maintain a French consulate general in the Atlantic provinces, an essential tool in attracting European immigrants. Other actions that the SNA carries out are also in line with this objective. So, we implore the federal government to reflect on the issue of Francophone immigration in a broader perspective of international relations and commit now to the development of a Francophone diplomacy strategy that will support the new Francophone immigration policy. Thank you, Mr. Theberge. I gave you an extra 20 seconds, but because Mr. Castonguay was short by about 2 minutes, we're still on time, as all members are fully aware. We have a tight schedule, but you all have 6 minutes each. We'll start with our first Deputy Chair of the Standing Committee on Official Languages, Mr. Godin. The floor is yours for 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. There's a big echo in the room. I'm not sure if you folks can hear it. I'd like to take this opportunity, Mr. Chairperson, to express my disappointment that currently in the House of Commons there's speeches on C13 while the Official Languages Committee is sitting. This is very unfortunate that the government is making this happen, and I just wanted to point that out in committee. Thanks to the witnesses for being here today. I think that everyone agrees that there's a huge problem when it comes to Francophone immigration, and all four of you have clearly demonstrated that it's high time that we take action. My first question will be directed at you, Mr. Castonguay. You talked about upping the targets. Now, I imagine that, well, as a parliamentarian, that's an easy solution. But I want to pick your brain and know how we can meet our targets. I agree with you that we need to up our targets, but a target is just a figure. Can you give us some clear recommendations? And I'll ask the same question of the other three witnesses. Could you please give us clear recommendations, perhaps 2 or 3 in a row, so that our report will be effective and give Immigration Canada the tools it needs. Mr. Castonguay, if you could take a stab at that. I'm not an immigration expert when it comes to recruiting and retaining immigrants. What I can tell you is, however, that there is a huge problem, not just outside Quebec, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, but in Quebec itself. Quebec, up until recently, has managed to maintain the demographic weight of Francotopes among its new arrivals. I'm sorry to cut you off, Mr. Castonguay. I don't want to talk about the past. We all agree, we're all on the same page, everyone around this table and the witnesses too, there is a problem. What are some concrete actions and solutions to address the issue if possible? Well, the solutions, as far as I see it, should be taken or implemented by both the Quebec government and the federal government. On the part of the Quebec government, there should be improved recruitment and reception of French language immigrants. There's just something wrong with the current picture. There's complete and utter confusion. When immigrants arrive nowadays in Quebec, it would seem that about half of them come under the foreign workers stream, and the i.e. temporary foreign workers, and also the student stream, and they also have a temporary status. Now, they join society for their studies or for their work, and then it's not Quebec that selects them at this stage of the game. This is an area of jurisdiction that's the bailiwick of the federal government. I'm sorry to cut you off, Mr. Castonguay, again. Thank you very much for responding to my question. I would like Mr. Theberge to chip in now, or to chime in rather. Mr. Theberge, you referred to the issues in the Atlantic provinces. You said that the Atlantic provinces are fully cognizant of this and ready to work hand in hand with the federal government. Let me ask you a straightforward question. Do you believe that under the new Official Languages Act, that the new Official Languages Act will meet the demands and requirements of the 4 Atlantic provinces when it comes to immigration? Response. Well, that would be a two-pronged answer. Things need to be done not in stovepipes, but together in conjunction, not only with the Act itself, but between the different levels of government. There also needs to be diplomatic efforts on the world stage. And whatever we do needs to support the community, and that goes in hand with what the provincial and the federal governments should be doing. Thank you, Mr. Theberge. I'll just jump over to another witness, the SANB, Société de l'Acadie du Nouveau-Brunswick, Mr. Duceppe. You also said that the federal government should be working hand in hand with the New Brunswick government. We are aware that there is about a 5-year delay here. Now, if you had a magic wand that you could wave tomorrow or today, what would you tell us, the parliamentarians? I can see I only have a minute left, but what would you tell us we should do to find a quick solution to this problem that's been dragging on for several years? Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Chair. I think we should remind parliamentarians that the Constitution Act states that immigration is a shared area of jurisdiction, and the Charter states that the 2 official language communities in New Brunswick are entitled to equality. Well, separate institutions, and of course immigration is a shared area of jurisdiction, but just like Quebec, New Brunswick should enjoy more funding and more a higher stake. So there needs to be decentralisation from the federal government, give more power to New Brunswick to manage its own affairs in terms of immigration. I'd like to ask the same question of Ms. Roy, but only have 15 seconds left. What are you expecting from the budget tomorrow when it comes to funding for the official languages immigration stream? Thank you very much, Mr. Godin. Ms. Roy can respond in a second round if she sees fit. We'll now move on to Mr. Francis Drouin. The floor is yours for 6 minutes, sir. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. I'd like to thank all of the witnesses in attendance here this afternoon. And I'd like to congratulate Mr. Godin on the questions that he asked. I know that both he and I agree fully when it comes to international francophonie. We might have our differences of opinion when it comes to local francophonie, domestically speaking. I think that he believes that it's a problem that the Official Languages Committee is sitting at the same time that C13 is being debated in the House. But I think it's a tremendous opportunity for others who are not members of the Official Languages Committee to speak in the House. Official languages belong to all of us and not just the Official Languages Committee, of course. Now, Ms. Hua, on that particular issue, I'm not aware. I don't know if you knew you were going to appear before the Official Languages Committee ahead of time this week. I don't know if you knew this when you wrote your statement on the objectives that you're calling on the federal government to meet. You know full well that we have failed to meet our 4.4% objective for a number of years, in fact, for decades. So here's my question. Has the FCFA developed bonds with international groups and advocacy groups to attract francophones to Canada? Response. Well, I'd just tack on to Mr. Godin's question yesterday. In the budget, we'd like there to be greater funding for recruitment, as we've seen our partners engage in. The SANB is doing a lot of recruitment, as is the New Brunswick Association. So it'd be great if we got funding so that we can perform recruitment in Francophone communities or undertake recruitment in those communities. And that is something that we would hope to see from the government when it comes to its Francophone immigration policy, as that's fleshed out. And as you saw early in the week, we suggested a whole slew of programs that would be included in that Francophone immigration policy. And the opportunity for further recruitment would be part and parcel of those measures. Well, thank you. And just if I could just add that there is a fund under the former Official Languages Roadmap to support community organisations that go abroad, take part in Destination Canada, in Europe, in the Mid-East, all across the globe, and that funding was cut. And for a number of years, these organisations no longer get funding from the federal government to conduct its advocacy and promotional efforts. I know that my colleague, Mr. Serré, was at the Collège, the Cité Collégiale, and I know that he has a big role to play on the African continent, not for advocacy, but for training to prepare Francophone immigrants who are going to come to Canada. Mr. Dupuis, your remarks were key, and there's been a lot of testimony on how important it is to have a modernised Official Languages Act, and you and your predecessor have mentioned on a number of occasions how important it is for you that the bill is enacted as quickly as possible. Now, we'll see how that plays out. I'm sure a number of you have amendments that you'd like to suggest. Now, how important is it to get this bill through committee as quickly as possible, in your opinion? Response. Well, it's absolutely crucial that the legislation gets enacted. There are some positive aspects to the legislation, but others need to be tweaked. For example, we would like to work with a number of committees to ensure that our proposed amendments are factored in. I think most members of the committee have received our list of proposed amendments. It's very important that this happens quickly, but properly, more importantly, and we'll have an opportunity to make put forward a number of amendments too, especially when it comes to immigration. We have an amendment on Francophone immigration that we'd like to see integrated into that bill. Mr. Chairperson, I'd just like to move my motion that I had an opportunity to send out to all members of the committee on the 1st of April. It was not an April Fool's joke. I'm moving the motion today. I don't know whether members want me to read that motion into the record, but my motion deals specifically with C13. And we know that there will be a parliamentary recess for 2 weeks over Easter, so it's important that the motion here dates back to the 25th of April. Well, this won't give members much an opportunity to determine which witnesses should be invited to that committee meeting. And I don't think that anyone in the room would be against commencing a pre-study on C13 in short order. We'd be inviting the official languages minister, the president of the Treasury Board. We've had a lot of questions about centralisation, the role of the Treasury Board, and I think it's important that members vote in favour of this motion. But I'm going to read it into the record to refresh folks' memory. And that is pursuant to Standing Order 1083F, the committee begin a subject matter study of the government's modernisation of the Official Languages Act, comparing Bill C13, an act to amend the Official Languages Act, to enact the use of French in federally regulated private businesses act, and to make related amendments to other acts, to Bill C32, an act to amend the Official Languages Act, and to make related and consequential amendments to other acts from the 43rd Parliament and English and French towards a substantive equality of official languages in Canada. 2. The committee invite the Minister of Official Languages and the President of the Treasury Board to discuss the changes between C13 and previous legislation and to respond to questions on the current bill before the House. 3. Members of the committee submit their prioritised witness lists for the study to the clerk of the committee no later than 12 p.m. on Friday, April 25th, 2022, and that the compiled list be distributed to members the same day. 4. If Bill C13 is referred to the committee by the House during the subject matter study, all evidence and documentation received by the committee during the study related to Bill C13 be taken into consideration by the committee during its legislative study of Bill C13. 5. Stay with me. I've just got 6 points here. The clerk of the committee notifies immediately each member of parliament who is not a member of a caucus represented on the committee to inform them of the beginning of the subject matter study in order to invite them to start working on their proposed amendments to the bill, which would be considered during the clause-by-clause study of Bill C13. And 6, the committee begin this subject matter study no later than Wednesday, May 4th, 2022.
Monsieur Drouin.
Thank you, Mr. Drouin. Just a second, Mr. Beaulieu. You started your 6 minutes started a bit earlier. We did receive each of us a copy of a motion. So before we go further, I need to check do all members agree? That was the question. However, before I will give the floor to Mr. Beaulieu, I think it's unfortunate that we impede on the time that we have with our witnesses, and we do have quite a few witnesses with us for the first part. Maybe we can actually increase the time given to these witnesses because we don't want to penalize these witnesses, and we all, members of Parliament, wish to ask questions to these witnesses. I think all the studies we're looking into right now are actually very relevant in the scope of C13. We did talk about a pre-study, so I'm not in favor of the motion. I did study that point, Mr. Beaulieu. It's not exactly the same motion as last time, the one we talked about in camera. So that's why I allowed the motion to be tabled. Trust me, I did check with our various advisors before allowing it. Are there any other interventions on this motion? Mr. Chair, yes. I also wanted to speak to this. Yes, please, Mr. Godin. Go ahead. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I generally agree with my colleague from the Bloc. I think it's It's not a good idea to actually do this, to table a motion right in the middle of a panel. So I believe that this discussion on the motion should be put on the back burner for now. Well, the motion was tabled, or was sent rather, last Monday. It was sent to all of us, and it has been tabled by the one bringing forward the motion. So, Madam Clerk, let's just suspend a second. I just want to double check something. Let's suspend for just a second. Mr. Godin's request to adjourn the motion proposed by Mr. Drouin. So let's go forward with a vote.
Monsieur Drouin.
Contre.
Monsieur Iacono.
Contre.
Madame Kayabaga. Madame Latanzio.
Contre.
Monsieur Serré.
Contre.
Monsieur Godin.
Pour.
Monsieur Gourde. Monsieur Reis.
Pour.
Monsieur Généreux.
Pour.
Monsieur Beaulieu.
Pour.
Et Monsieur Boulris.
Pour.
6 contre, 5 pour.
Motion carries 6-5. All right. Mr. Beaulieu, did you have anything to add? Could we extend the first panel, please? Because there are only 3 witnesses for the second part. Yes, we'll do exactly as last Monday. I double-checked with committee staff. We will extend. We will have 2 rounds of questions for each hour or for each part of the panel. We may have to truncate a bit of the second part. All right, so let's go back to Mr. Beaulieu. You have 6 minutes. The floor is yours. 6 minutes for questions to our witnesses. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question is for Mr. Castonguay. Since the immigration system has changed in Canada, permanent immigrants now have a temporary status, either worker or student when they arrived, and we've seen that there are fewer Francophone immigrants within this immigration stream. Would you agree that the federal government should allow Quebec to control that part of immigration? Mr. Castonguay, we can't hear you. Yes. I believe that there are some communication issues. I don't know what it is exactly between the governments of Canada and Quebec. There's a doubling of responsibilities regarding immigration, which means that many immigrants who, for example, who come from France, who are French from France, who are exceedingly frustrated because of the delays before they get their permanent residency here. It's scandalous. The same goes for African Francophone students who want to come to study in Quebec, and they see their requests denied all the time. This doesn't make any sense. So it's not surprising when we see the numbers, the recent numbers, that, well, for example, Quebec does not receive 80 to 90% of Francophones and Francotropes within these immigrants, which would be the usual way of going about things. It's similar for Francophone minorities. But in the case of Quebec, we see that in Quebec, only 78% of Quebecers, according to the last census, were French-speaking. And this is something we haven't seen since 1991. It's a huge issue. And the biggest issue in that is immigration. It's the selection and the recruitment of immigrants that can allow Quebec to keep its 80% French-speaking majority. Each census, you see that number slowly dwindling, and when we get the new numbers in this coming August, we'll see that the numbers are below 78%. It's fatal. It's mathematically... Sorry. Yes. Just to give you an example, in the case of students who make requests to get a temporary student visa, first, they are accepted by a French cégep or French university, whether it is in Quebec or outside of Quebec, and we see that the data is similar. And then, in the case of Quebec, they receive an acceptance certificate from the Quebec government, and in some cases, 80% of them see their requests denied. And that is why I believe that at the end of the day, it's the Quebec government that should have the final say, and we need a similar mechanism for Francophone students coming outside of Quebec. I think it's a president or a chair of a university outside of Quebec that told us that he goes abroad to recruit Francophone students, but most of the temporary students who are recruited are in fact denied by the Canadian government, which is incomprehensible. This is where we see the highest rates of rejections. It's among those students, those Francophone students. So I don't know if you, Mr. Castonguay, or other witnesses have ideas how to go about this when we have people coming from Francophone Africa, from Algeria, and when you see that these requests from those countries have a rejection rate of about 80, 90%, well, it seems to me that maybe we should cap that refusal rate, for example, at 50%. Maybe that should be the guideline. Well, as I said earlier, that's the Canadian perspective. The problem is that it's a shared responsibility between Quebec and the government and the Francophone communities outside of Quebec. We need to have a global approach because the demographic weight of Francophones is not decreasing only in Quebec, it is also decreasing in New Brunswick and all across Canada. And we see that the numbers are going down very fast. In 1951, the numbers were much higher. Now it's 21% in 2016, according to the 2016 census. And in due time, it's going to be under 20% for French speakers in Canada. Question. FCFI is asking that we increase up to 12% Francophone immigration outside of Quebec. And of course, the first objective was 4.4%, and that objective was never achieved. But isn't there a risk that at the end of the day, if we do that to increase immigration outside of Quebec, we won't have enough Francophone immigration in Quebec? Answer. I think it's time for the Canadian government to see reality for what it is. As you've said, every province needs to see an increase in French-speaking immigrants, francophones, francotropes, those people who want to be French-speaking in their lives. Every province needs more of them. And how to go about this to make sure that what we do in Quebec does not hinder New Brunswick and other provinces? Well, that is the issue. Thank you, Mr. Castonguay. Thank you, Mr. Beaulieu. We can come back to that, certainly. The next round of question will start with Mr. Boulris. You have 6 minutes, sir. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all our witnesses for being with us this afternoon to broach this very important topic. My first question, I believe, will be to either Ms. Mallet or Mr. Théberge, or both. Of course, immigration is an international phenomenon, and it's important that we promote our francophonie abroad through our various diplomatic streams. We need consular offices, but we also need some diplomatic ties. How must the Francophone immigration policy coordinate with other departments, for example, global affairs, to make sure that the policies take into account what are the needs and what's going on in various parts of the country? Thank you for your question. As we've said, immigration cannot be seen as something on its own. It can't be treated in silos. For example, there was a program that we talked about at the FCFA. There was a diplomatic program that allowed some, like the Acadians, to go abroad internationally to create relationships, to promote its artists, to promote Acadia and Canada as a place where one could come and live. And of course, all this communication has beneficial impacts for Francophone immigration, but for all of society. A policy that is enacted with the collaboration of global affairs would allow us to, in fact, yes, allow the development of the Acadian people and would give more power to Acadians to attract and to retain more immigrants. One cannot talk about immigration while talking solely about immigration and not about everything else that surrounds it. Thank you, Mr. Théberge. The next question is for Mr. Roy and perhaps for Mr. Dupuis. Well, first a comment. I think we can all agree that the pool of potential Francophone immigrants is mostly located in Africa, in Northern Africa, in Sub-Saharan Africa, but there are obstacles, maybe I can say systemic obstacles or maybe biases in programs, and that's why there's a very, very high rejection rate of students coming from Africa. If you have a comment on that, I would love to hear you on that. I find this very troubling for the future. And Ms. Roy, you talked about new targets for 2024. You're talking about 12% for 2024 and 20%, if I understood correctly, for 2036. On what are your numbers, 12% and 20% based on? I understand that the ridiculous rate of 4.4%, which was never achieved, has been cast aside. But why 12 and 20%? Why these numbers? Answer. I can certainly give you part of the answer, and Alain can certainly complete the answer. This has been his file for the longest time. So on the question of international students, it's important to break down barriers. One of the most problematic issues is that students must demonstrate that they want to go back to their country. And we believe that's paradoxical because we do have actually a labor shortage all across Canada, and these students are trained in Canada if they manage to get their student visas, and they could actually alleviate that shortage. But one of the main obstacles is that we need to demonstrate, that one must demonstrate when one actually makes their request, that they'll go back to their country. And that's usually a big issue. And I won't elaborate more on this because I do want to answer the second question you asked, sir. We commissioned a study, a demographic study on Francophone immigration and on the demographic weight of Francophones in our communities. And this study was made public Monday at the same time that we communicated our targets to the federal government. And these targets did not come out of thin air. They come from this very serious study, and this is the first time that we've had such a study with such relevant data that allows us to determine these targets. We wanted targets that allowed us to catch up in regards to what happened previously, and we want to strengthen the communities as well. So it's both catching up, but also looking forward. And I'll stop here so I can let Alain give more details if need be. Thank you. Yes, and I would like to ask a question to Mr. Doucet as well. Yes, the study says that if we want to achieve the 4.4 initial target, we need to set a 16% target now until 2036. How can we achieve this? We need a very ambitious policy. We need new means, better means. The usual IRCC programs will not be able to allow communities to achieve their objectives. We need specific objectives, policies, and measures for Francophone immigration. We need a separate stream for Francophone immigration. We need annual targets. We need partnerships for employers, for communities. All of this has to be based on labor needs and labor shortages in communities. And that's one measure amongst many. But we need an ambitious, tailor-made policy if we are to achieve those objectives. Thank you very much, Mr. Boulris. Thank you very much, Mr. Dupuis. We will start with the second round of question. We will start with Mr. Bernard Généreux's questions. You have 5 minutes this time around. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all witnesses. I could certainly take a picture of all of us here today. Of course, over the years, members of the committee and the stakeholders changed as well. But I was sitting here 12 years ago, and the questions we were asking ourselves were exactly the same. And billions of dollars were invested by the federal government over the last 7 years. And despite this, they've waited 7 years. The government waited 7 years before tabling a reform of the Act. And here we are today with Francophone immigration in minority settings, but also in Quebec, as Mr. Beaulieu said, that is dwindling. So the question is for you, Ms. Roy. Your answer was based on the study you commissioned in order to establish that the target should go from 4 to 12 and at the end of the day to 20%. And I personally agree with that. But the problem is that the government, despite all the money it spends in every field and domain in Canada, does not show any willingness to do it. Do you sincerely believe that the government wants to, in fact, retain and attract this Francophone immigration?
I think that based on the conversations that we've had, can you hear me? Can you hear me? With the conversations that we've had with Minister Fraser's office and the parliamentary secretary, and all of the conversations that were had with Alain and his team and other government officials, I think there is an appetite to discuss and collaborate with us. The objective is to talk about these targets and to talk about policies. We know that we're never going to reach these targets. We know that these targets are ambitious, but we have to do more, like I said in my opening remarks. We have to deal with immigration differently, and we can't treat immigration to minority communities in the same way as we do with majority communities. So we need a policy for Francophone immigration that's developed by and for Francophone communities. So we have to have something to say in the development of these policies. When we did our press conference, we listed a series of measures and programs that should be included in this Francophone immigration policy. We alluded to it earlier, but we touch on foreign students. We talk about family sponsorship, of settlement of refugees. So we were looking for programs that are designed with a Francophone lens so that we can reach these targets. This is what we'll need to try and reestablish the demographic balance. Madame Lavoie, we've been talking about this for many, many years, this idea of for and by francophones. Here's a challenge that I see. I see that there's some hypocrisy here. When we talk, and when Monsieur Beaulieu and others have mentioned it earlier, when we talk about francophone immigrants who come from Northern Africa or Africa, there's a form of discrimination that we're observing, and we're blaming the software and an algorithm, and we're blaming these technologies for people who are having their applications denied. But there has to be something that we're not seeing. All of the policies that you've mentioned, by and for francophones, with the help of the government, they'll listen to you. They'll listen to you until the cows come home. And to shut you up, they'll give you money and they'll hope that they'll get rid of you for a few years. But the truth is that the policies need to change within the federal machine. Mr. Castonguay talked about it earlier. This is an aberration. What we're seeing, the facts and the objectives are very far apart. It's like we're here, we all have our head in the sand, and we're working backwards, and we're not even realizing that the problem is the political environment. We're struggling to make a concrete action that leads to results. I think we need a whole new strategy. We can no longer aspire to attain francophone immigration by changing a few criteria of the existing programs. We need a custom-made solution. I think the political will is there from all political parties. But it's true. We have appeared before this committee 2 or 3 times. We've rang the alarm. If we've appeared in the case of crisis. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Dupuy. I have to stop you here. We're going to move on. Mr. Angelo Iacono, you have 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to make a comment first. It's very easy to criticize what the current government is doing or has been trying to do for the last 6 or 7 years. But I remember very well, dear colleagues, what the former government was doing. What were you doing for the 10 years before that? Not only did you do nothing, but you actually blocked the funds. So instead of criticizing, I think we should focus on solutions. Because the goal here is not to criticize the government of the day, but to face facts and try and act. Mr. Doucet, I have a question for you. To attract more francophones, the Express Entry Permanent Residence Program gives them more points. According to you, what other initiatives should IRCC undertake to increase francophone immigration in Canada? And how do we guarantee long-term success? Thank you, Mr. Iacono, for this question. My colleague, Mr. Chiasson, could add to my answer after. But I don't want to repeat myself about jurisdictions and the decentralization of immigration in New Brunswick. I think we have to think outside the box. At the SANB, we try to avoid getting involved in the IRCC target rhetoric. There are other concepts that we could explore, constitutional concepts. If I understand the Constitution correctly, official languages is not an area of jurisdiction. When a subject is not specifically mentioned as a provincial or federal jurisdiction, it falls under federal jurisdiction. If I could paraphrase Jean-Maurice Simard, he says that official languages are not officially... The interpreter signals that the sound is inadequate for interpretation. The interpreter will be summarizing the comments. There are concrete ideas that can be developed, that could be implemented. But I think that currently the federal government is lacking creativity. I'd like to pass the floor to Mr. Chiasson. Thank you. I would say simply that the problem is IRCC. I wouldn't say that it's the Canadian Parliament or any given party's government. This is a departmental problem. The department is setting really unusual objectives. And with all the respect I have for the Official Languages Committee, we've been invited to appear before this committee, but not to the IRCC. And they are the ones who are responsible for assessing the IRCC. The Official Languages Committee can't be a catch-all for any issue that vaguely touches on official languages. But to answer your specific question, sir, there comes a point where we have to reach a conclusion. IRCC has put all of its eggs in the Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver baskets. So regional funding for IRCC is dictated by the number of immigrants that a province will receive. So if you're losing at the start, you will lose at the end. So at a certain point, we have to try something new. We should be a little bit more creative, as said my colleague, Mr. Doucette. There comes a point, or there was a point, when the Quebec government signed a deal with the federal government, and then officials from IRCC were like, thank goodness we don't have to deal with French people anymore. And now they find themselves still stuck with the Francophone problems. So the department has not adjusted to the fact that they have to serve Francophonie outside of Quebec. And that, sir, is the problem. Thank you, Mr. Chiasson. Your time is up, Mr. Iacono. Next speaker has 2.5 minutes. Mr. Beaulieu, you have the floor. With all due respect, Mr. Chiasson, I completely disagree with what you're saying. It's nice to blame IRCC and government officials, but, you know, there are people above there that, at the top, that are giving directives. So to say that all governments are doing the same things and have no power over their departments, it's the same as saying one government or the other makes no difference. That's not very constructive. I'm a skeptic. I think we will need major consultation to generate results. We can be told, yeah, we think things are going to go well. We spoke to the Department of Immigration, but with C-13, we're asking for a blank check. All we have here are good intentions. There's something really simple we can do. If we have an 80% refusal rate, we should increase our acceptance rate to 50%. I think there's stuff we can do with that. What do you think? Mr. Théberge, what do you think? As I said earlier, we can't focus only on one issue. We can't see immigration in a vacuum. In the document that was tabled and in my opening remarks, I mentioned many avenues and areas that we can focus on. I'll also like to react to what was said earlier. We can't focus only on Toronto or the Eastern Ontario, Quebec, and New Brunswick when it comes to Francophone immigration. We also have to think about Shetikan and Caraquette. I totally agree, but I'd like to add one little caveat. IRCC in Montreal is terrible. Everything is in everything. Is in English. The refusal rates are through the roots. We have to do something together to make things change. Let's also remember that the community has mobilized, and there are many things that have been done. We have put in place services. We have increased our promotional activities. But still today, immigration organizations that serve the Francophone communities don't have the rights to serve certain communities, refugees, and others. So we can work hand in hand with the government, but like the FCFA, it has to be by and for Francophones. Thank you very much. We're going to have to suspend very shortly. Mr. Boulris, stepping in for Mrs. Ashton, you have 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you're confusing me with Mrs. Ashton, you don't just have a problem with a cough. I think you might also need some glasses. Mr. Doucette, I really liked... Our committee chair is very brave today. He's working despite having COVID. Mr. Doucette, I liked what you said earlier. These federal policies that are one-size-fits-all solution from New Brunswick to Newfoundland to Nova Scotia, it doesn't suit New Brunswick. It doesn't address the specificity of the 30% of Francophones that live there. If we have a 4.4% target, it makes no sense. I wanted to give you the opportunity to speak about the Quebec-Canada Accord. You have a long list of areas where we could make a difference, health and education, etc., and how that can make the difference for Francophones in New Brunswick. I'd like you to talk about that more. Thank you very much for this question. This is something we've been asking for many years. We would like to align the Charter of Rights and Freedoms with the language rights. Thankfully, with the work that has been done with the SANB and other New Brunswick organizations, we were able to include this in C13 that was tabled on March 1st. Specifically, Article 45.1 that talks about recognizing the unique quality of Francophones in New Brunswick, recognizing both official language communities, and in complement, by interpreting the Official Languages Act, we add a catch-up element. So adding immigration and the 5-year accord and the many areas, when I see this reparation policy, I see good things. When I think about an agreement between New Brunswick and federal government, it gives the New Brunswick government extra tools, and it's an opportunity for the federal government to negotiate something with New Brunswick. The burden can't be carried only by New Brunswick. It also falls to the federal government. So we're looking forward to see what will come out of C13 that was tabled on March 1st. Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, dear witnesses, good debates, good questions. We're honored to have you here with us. If you believe, as witnesses, that there is extra information that you would like to share with us, please note that you can send it to our clerk. The clerk will distribute this information to all members of the committee, so do not hesitate. Send us anything you think is relevant and useful for this current study. That being said, we are going to suspend for a few minutes to allow our witnesses from the first panel to leave and welcome the second. welcome to our second panel. These are completely new witnesses that have never appeared. We have Monsieur Mahamadou Sarr, Assistant to the Assistant Dean for Research and Graduate Studies, Syria Kitty, Chief Executive Officer, and Alain Laberge, Director General of the Franco-Manitoban School Division. Please note that I have 6 to 8 feet of snow where I'm living, so I hope that makes you feel better about snow out where you are. So you will all have 5 minutes to introduce yourselves and tell us what you think we should hear today. When you have about a minute left and 15 seconds, I will show it to my camera. You'll have a visual warning. So, Mr. Sarr, you have the floor for 5 minutes. Hello, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to talk to you about my experience as an immigrant first, and also as a person who works with immigrants. I wanted to say that I wanted to focus on students. This is a very interesting clientele for Canada. These are people that are highly sought after. An article was published in Les Affaires. We see that student tuition is between $20,000 and $70,000 a year.
In the budget report of 2019-2020, the University of Toronto has stated that tuition from foreigners accounts for about 30% of its revenue, more than at a federal level. So therefore, there's a drop in the number of foreign students would jeopardize certain universities. And you've seen this occur with the Laurentian University. Canadian universities have adopted a whole slew of strategies to attract foreign students, particularly graduate and postgraduate studies. In 2017, Quebec received 12% of foreign students in Canada, compared to 24%, for example, in British Columbia. Now, there is a gap that needs to be filled when it comes to the lack of Francophone immigration, and there needs to be a broad-based strategy and without one single focus. Now, why am I talking about international students right now? Most of them have done primary school, high school in their country of origin, and even a number of years at university. Now, for the most part, the lion's share of them end up being very productive for Canadian society, and especially in graduate and postgraduate circles in Canada, they're very beneficial. So there needs to be a broad-based strategy, and here are the proposals that I'd like to make. Statistics attest to the fact that about 2/3 of foreign students remain in Canada after the completion of their studies. We know that it's easier once they have a degree to adapt to Canadian society, and there's less of an investment to be made in that regard. Do I still have any time left, Mr. Chairperson? So in order to attract the maximum number of Francophone students, well, that's what we need to do, of course, but you recall a couple of years back, there was an election promise made to exempt international Francophone students from certain requirements. And Quebec, for example, entered into an agreement with France, and therefore it's much easier to bring French students to Canada. But most Francophones will come from Africa. France is a developed country. It's much more difficult to attract experts from the African continent. So why hasn't this worked? Well, it's because there's the sense that there is perhaps a quota. Why is it that there's not that many African francophones coming to Canada? This is quite palpable, but there is a golden opportunity to go after highly qualified individuals who'll be ambassadors, who'll undertake research. And it's not just Africa or Maghreb, for example. And perhaps I can turn back to those issues so that I don't go over time right now. But basically, it's much easier for institutions in Acadia and in other provinces to attract foreign students. So I'll stop there and wait for your questions. Thank you very much. Mr. Sirakiti, the floor is yours for 5 minutes. Yes, hello, members. I feel very honoured to be before you here today. And as MP Arsenault said, it is true that I am the CEO of a business that specialises in business development and human resources. And I'd like to take this opportunity to tell you that I am the honorary consul for Benin and in New Brunswick. The New Brunswick has decided to fast-track its economic relations with Benin, and there's an honorary consulate that's been open for the past 2 years. And this is a golden opportunity for me to work with you. Now, as far as immigration is concerned, as Albert Camus said, yes, I have a homeland, and it is the French language. French is a language that founds and unites. Canada is a very brilliant and strong country, respected on the world stage by virtue of its bilingualism. That's what attracts people to Canada, its quality of life. It's known for its strong economy, political stability, cultural and linguistic diversity. Most Canadians speak 2, if not more than 2 languages. It's therefore important to preserve this richness, which is language and languages, but to go further and to strengthen them by giving each and every Canadian an opportunity to learn a second language. Now, when I see my kids switch back and forth with ease between French and English, I'm really, really impressed. And the Canadian authorities, especially those in charge of immigration and official languages, must continue to work hard to promote a cohabitation between Anglophones and Francophones. Francophones must recognise and acknowledge that the language of Molière is full of rules and complexities, and therefore we need to be indulgent in supporting and encouraging the efforts made by politicians. It's so lovely when we see an English speaker who doesn't understand French making an effort, and the same is true in the reverse. So living together, working together in this way can help the country flourish. And I'm honoured and delighted to tell you that the target of 4.4% of Francophones is tough to reach, but it's a tad paradoxical, isn't it? To the extent that, well, I don't understand how we aren't able to meet that target, which strikes me as really quite reasonable. So in order to achieve that target, I have a number of strategies that I'd like to float and debate with you this afternoon. First, I believe that it's crucial to better inform those host communities, ensure greater awareness in those host communities. In other words, those folks who are responsible at a grassroots level for putting in place immigration procedures need to be better abreast of what immigration entails. What does immigration bring to Canada? Some, of course, see immigration as a threat, and yet business people see immigration as an opportunity. Now, secondly, both federal and provincial governments need to work hand in hand with businesses, companies, corporations, chambers of commerce, educational institutions, and the new communities themselves. They all need to pitch in, along with the new governments themselves. Canada needs to identify niche Francophone countries where there are a lot of young, dynamic Francophone youth who are able to quickly adapt and have coping skills. And we need to identify Canadian organisations that could play an important role in cutting through the red tape when it comes to human resources and procedures. And finally, I think that it's also crucial that Canada and that the provincial governments invest in getting new arrivals ready to come to Canada. Well, thank you very much. You'll be able to elaborate when we have our round of questions. We have to stick to time limits, of course. Mr. Tiberge, the floor is now yours for 5 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson, and hello, members of the Standing Committee on Official Languages. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm currently in Lorette, a small village in southeastern Manitoba covered by Treaty 1, the traditional treaty of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota and Dene peoples, and the ancestral land of the Métis Nation. I'd like to begin by thanking you for allowing me to testify on behalf of the Franco-Manitoban School Division. It's a provincial school division with about 24 schools and close to 6,000 students who share a common language, French. But above all, who present a cultural and social face of the beauty of our Francophonie in a minority setting. Now, you've understood that my remarks today will be focusing primarily on education. And I know that it's not a federal area of jurisdiction, but a provincial one. And as a number of my fellow witnesses said in their opening remarks, immigration must not be seen in a silo. Now, the importance of Francophone immigration in a minority setting is important not only in terms of inclusion, but in terms of integration. Now, sometimes the semantics of these two words confuse people. But what we need to understand is despite the targets that we want to attain, we need an inclusive society where students, parents contribute to a flourishing society, and as a result, that will avoid the creation of ghettos. That's the very worst thing that can occur in our Francophone communities. Now, I've cited this 4.4%. In 2003, the primary objective of the strategic framework was of particular interest to this study. The goal was to increase the number of French-speaking immigrants in order to increase the demographic weight of Francophone minority communities. Now, at the last census in 2019, Canada welcomed just over 340,000 new residents, of which Manitoba welcomed approximately 19,000, and of which only 300 spoke French, which equates to a percentage of 1.5%. To be honest with you, there are a number of families that identify themselves as speaking both languages, and yet they don't send their kids to Francophone schools simply because they're not aware that they exist, or because they're disillusioned by the fact that we have a province or a country that calls itself bilingual when in actual fact it's not. Now, 4.4%, that is the target that has been set. I think that it should be only the starting point and not an end in and of itself. We haven't reached it since 2003, and each and every year, well, we're falling further and further behind. And because of that, our official languages communities are, in fact, withering at the vine. If you don't have Francophone individuals, it's difficult to have a community school. It's a term that we've borrowed from the province of New Brunswick. It's about the health of the economy, arts, sports and culture. You can't do that without Francophone individuals. Now, unlike the schools of the majority language, minority language schools don't just have to provide academic curricula. There's values, identity, and all of that doesn't exist fundamentally in the majority language school. Now, I should point out that the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms enables us to have rights holders in our schools. There are a number of parents a quarter of a century ago who mobilised and stood up to ensure that we got the status of rights holders. So immigration is so important when it comes to the school network. It's a way of it's a gathering space for francophones. And it's important for social justice as well. Now, if I could just conclude my remarks by saying this, just a quick story. I met a number of parents and kids that come to go to our schools, and they say, why can't I work in French in Manitoba? Why can't I go to a clinic and speak French in Manitoba? Why can't I get service in French? These folks get disgruntled, disillusioned. They take their kids out of French language schools and put them in English language schools because they want to guarantee that they'll have a future where they can get a job. Thank you very much, sir, and we'll start our first round of questions. 5 minutes. Mr. Godin, the floor is yours first. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. I'd like to thank the witnesses for their attendance today. My first question will be for Mr. I'm sorry if I butcher the pronunciation of your name, but Mr. Mohamedou Sarr. Now, you said that 2/3 of foreign students remain in Canada at the completion of their studies. Now, this is a kind of a development tool, isn't it? And I don't mean that in a pejorative way. It strengthens Canada's immigration when we are able to attract these foreign students, because those people, for the most part, will end up staying in Canada. So if you're going to invest in a category or a group of people, why not invest in people who are more likely to stay in Canada? So how do we attract more foreign students? Could you give us the broad brushstrokes of what solutions you have? We understand that Francophone immigration has been a problem for a number of years. Now, we want to find solutions to that problem and draft a report. Mr. Sarr, what would be just 1 or 2 recommendations to make Canada more attractive to foreign students, please? Thank you very much, sir. Well, you're right. You're entirely right. I agree with you 100%. There's a lot of difficulty to do with paperwork and red tape. There are a lot of educational institutions that would like to admit more foreign students, but the paperwork makes it tough. And unfortunately, the most concrete proposal that I can offer you today, and perhaps that would be a good idea in Quebec, what we should do just as we did with France and Belgium, and that way there would be an exemption from the higher tuition fees that foreigners pay, especially when there's a lot of shortfall to make up. And I'm not just talking about Quebec, but in Sainte-Anne, in New Brunswick, in Nova Scotia, there are a lot of institutions that are in dire financial straits. And if these foreign students were to go to those institutions, and as I said earlier, Canada hasn't had to invest in their primary and secondary school studies, so this is a win for Canada. And, well, thank you very much, Mr. Sarr. I appreciate the recommendation that you've just offered up, but since we've been studying Francophone immigration, the problem that I see is not the number of students that want to come to Canada, but the cumbersome nature of the bureaucratic process and the bureaucracy. And, for example, Africa, well, in Africa, we seem to not be attracting many students at all. Now, what's that got to do with, and how do we break through that? Well, that's cut some of the things that we aren't aware of. It's the stuff that remains in our black box, if you will. Yes, we want francophones, but we want to strike a balance. We don't want too many veiled people or too many black people overnight. And of course, it's increasingly tough to attract people from France and Belgium. But I think there are a number of people. I'm sorry to cut you off, sir, but we're running out of time. But what I'm taking away from your recommendation is that there should be financial assistance to be able to reduce the burden of the tuition fees for these foreign students. Mr. Kitty, you're from Benin and you have settled here in New Brunswick, if I'm not mistaken. Now, Mr. Kitty, you're probably in contact with youth from from back home. Now, what is the issue? There seems to be a problem with filling out the requisite immigration forms on time. Could you just tell us, how it is for young people from your country who are trying to come to Canada? Response. Well, the situation is in Benin and elsewhere in Africa is that people are not well informed about the requirements in place in Canada. Now, why? They have to sometimes translating from French into English or English into French is a problem. Now, I've been living in Canada for many, many years, and I still have trouble filling out forms in both official languages.
The second thing that is going on in Africa, and in Benin especially, is there are many, many requests. Many of these applications are denied. They're denied for very trivial reasons. For example, financial means. We know parents are very rich. They can certainly pay the tuition of their children, but the visa is rejected. Why? Simply because mom and dad don't want to say how much actually money they have. Would there be a way? Thank you, Mr. Kitty. You can certainly elaborate later on. The next questions will be coming from Ms. Latanzio. You have 5 minutes. 6 minutes, rather. Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I would like to thank our 3 witnesses for sharing their expertise with us this afternoon. I would like to speak with Mr. Kitty. I agree with you, sir, when you say that being bilingual brings a lot to our country, to Canadians, and I agree with you that it's a strength of ours. I'd like to come back to the question you talked about earlier on, or rather the solutions you talked about earlier on. I wanted to know more about the 4th solution you've offered, investing in these new arrivings. Can you tell us more? Regarding this preparation, what we need is that the welcoming communities in many provinces, we have communities that need to communicate with local agents, with people from various communities, people that can communicate the information to various countries. I can certainly inform a lot of people, so can Mr. Sarr in his country. The communities must have a vital role to play in order to prepare all of these people who want to immigrate quickly, because we need we don't need only Acadians to prepare for these people coming here, because there are some social and cultural contexts that people who are originally from l'Acadie will not necessarily understand. So we need to play a more important role. Are you saying that we need to create welcoming centers staffed with people from the communities themselves on Canadian soil? We don't need to necessarily create another center of any sort. In fact, those organizations that exist can speak to people from various communities like myself or others in order to recruit people from Togo and Côte d'Ivoire and Benin. Quite often, these people have dreams. And often people think that they will arrive in Canada, everything will be easier. However, we're working much harder here than in many other countries. And how are things in Benin? How is, let's say, for example, an international student, university level, who sends an application? What would be the obstacles they would be faced with before arriving in Canada? Answer: the main obstacle is regarding costs. The costs. The proof that you want to study in Canada. And as Ms. Roy said earlier on, you need to prove that at the end of their studies, these students will go back to their countries because you know the generic answer. You have not convinced me. It's very vague. Doesn't mean anything. However, thousands of visas are rejected based on reasons that nobody knows anything about. The black box, as Mr. Sarr said. There are many, many applicants for which we don't know why the visa was refused, despite the fact that this applicant did meet all the criteria, without any exception. So, thank you for allowing me to say that all MPs need to work to make sure that when a visa is rejected, we know why it is rejected. That way, the rejected visa will give important information to the next applicant. If I understand well what you say, sir, you're saying that the rejection is not helpful at all. You want the rejection to have reasons with it that accompany it. Yes. If we know why it's rejected, the next applicant will be better prepared. Thank you. My next question is for Mr. Laberge. You mentioned that you have 6,000 Francophone students in Manitoba, and that over the last few years, you've seen a slight increase in growth, but not much, not enough. What is your opinion regarding this very slight growth that you've noticed? Answer: we work very closely with various organizations such as Accueil Francophone and the Réseau de l'Immigration Francophone, the Francophone Immigration Network, and we see that there are many people who arrive here and they are not sent where they should be, and they are sometimes rejected on technicalities, which means that we don't have the people that we should. We're not receiving the people we should for in our systems, in our schools, and it's the same for employees. We have people who are skilled; they're skilled workers in Northern Africa, elsewhere, but they can't, for example, teach in Canada because we don't recognize their skills. So you cross the ocean, you arrive in a new country. Your skills aren't recognized. What can you do? We need to help these people. And the main problem is that a lot of these people, they come here. And after that, after 12 months, after 15 months, we don't help them anymore. We don't accompany them anymore. And this help that we give them at first is very, very important. Thank you. And the next to speak will be Mr. Beaulieu, 6 minutes. Yes. Thank you. To exempt, in part, some students from tuition fees, I think is a valid idea. I think there are in Quebec some programs that allow some foreign students to pay the same tuition fees as Quebec students. But the main issue, it's that when we see the rejection rate, for example, in Algeria, 15% only of applicants are accepted. In 2020, in Benin, I want to make sure here, 17% only were accepted. And we see similar numbers all across Francophone Africa, in Algeria, in Haiti. However, when we see numbers regarding applicants from other countries like India, we see that more than 50% of them are accepted, and this is very hard to understand because in my writing, I know a lot of people, a lot of applicants, they are waiting for an answer for the longest time, and when they get an answer, oftentimes they get the "we are not convinced" answer because they haven't been able to prove that they will stay. But at the same time, we need some of these students to actually live in Canada afterwards. So I'm sure you know many students, many African students who applied for a student visa. Oftentimes, what are the reasons behind the rejections? Why is the rejection rate so high? Because oftentimes these students are accepted by universities and Cégep, and they're accepted by Quebec, and then they're rejected by the federal government. Why? Based on your experience, what is behind this? Well, generally speaking, it's the financial conditions that are an issue. Oftentimes, the first application, when the first application is made, the consulate makes the first sets of checks. But once it's sent to the government, it goes into the black box. If at least it told us, okay, it's a financial issue, well, then we would know that the financial proofs are not sufficient. But very recently, a few weeks ago, in fact, I saw, I heard about the application of a student who had paid for the full year, who had put in trust with Desjardins the requisite amount, saying, asking that the request be processed within a month, and yet it was denied. The other thing as well is that, well, if we want to decrease risk, is to get more interns. There's a very interesting program that allows for interns to come here for fewer than 120 days, and we don't need a work permit for that. That's a good program. It allows universities and allows people to test it out, basically, and to see, well, is this person interesting? Do we want to hire them, or do we want to go forward with them? But globally, I'd say that's the issue. These applications fall into this black box. Oftentimes, we believe it's for monetary reasons, for proof of funds, but oftentimes, the reason behind the rejection is that nothing proves that they'll come back after their studies. Yes, they need to prove that they want to actually live here, yes. It's hard to understand, says Mr. Beaulieu, but I want to be specific about one thing. For French and Belgium people, there's an exemption for the funds requested. They'll pay about $4,000 for the first session. But for other Francophone countries, it's not the same. However, there is an agreement between Quebec and other Francophone countries, including other countries, China, Brazil as well. But only 80 applicants out of 4,000 are accepted. Works out fine for people from France and Belgium. But a lot of these applicants don't come to Quebec. Yeah, it's not sufficient. Earlier on, I'm not too sure, maybe it was Mr. Kitty who said that sometimes it's hard for some people to switch from French to English when filling out the forms. Have you found that it's hard to speak with immigration agents who speak French? Yes, absolutely, says Mr. Kitty. Most documents are available in French, but sometimes it's hard to speak with a French-speaking agent. We're talking a lot about students right now, but there's a lot of potential lying with workers. And recently, during the pandemic, when we were at the height of the pandemic, I'd like to thank the chair for helping us welcome 43 families, Francophones from Togo originally, and I think that there's huge potential there. This is why we need to work with various economic councils, and also business centers. It's paramount. Thank you, Mr. Kiti. You're giving me a lot of compliments. I would love to have you speak many more minutes, but I need to stop you there. And now we're going to move on to Mr. Boulris for the New Democrats. You have 6 minutes. The floor is yours. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Thank you to each witness for being with us today. My first question is for Mr. Laberge. My colleague, whom you know very well, I believe, Mr. Ashton, who couldn't be with us today, did send me this question. She had to be in the chamber in order to table her bill. I'm sure you'll understand why she couldn't make it to committee today. Nevertheless, her question was on and it's a question that stems from her personal experience. It was hard for her, she has twins, to actually register her kids to French childcare. There's a shortage in Thompson of childcare workers, and of course this has been amplified by the pandemic. It's been very hard to recruit childcare workers in Thompson and French-speaking childcare workers. Do you believe, sir, that the policy should include the recruitment of childcare workers, a policy that would help francophones and francophiles learning French as early as possible, and of course registering their kids to French services? Absolutely, yes. It's a real challenge, even more so in rural regions. In Thompson, we did open up a French school 3 years ago, and there are childcare services, but there are some parents waiting for that service. And we know that when a parent registers their children for francophone services, childcare and school, they will stay within the system. But oftentimes there's no space, and they register them not in French. So to your question, do we need a policy in that regard? I'm not a politician, but as an administrator, I can tell you that when our schools are full, when our childcare centers are full, well, we have more French-speaking people, and that's great for the community. Thank you, sir. Earlier, you said, and rightly so, that education is of a provincial jurisdiction, but I've heard many people, especially from maritime provinces, who said that at the primary level, things are okay, but when it comes to the secondary level, when there's a lack of infrastructure, when there's a lack of sports infrastructure, artistic infrastructure, oftentimes Anglophone institutions are more attractive because they have more resources, because they're bigger, and therefore they have more attractive programs for teenagers. Do you see the same trend in your region? Yes, similarly indeed. Maybe not as much in Winnipeg, because we do have some French speakers in Winnipeg, so we do have some larger schools. But if you're in a rural setting and you have 50 students from grade 9 to grade 12, you can't have a hockey team, for example, which means that there's a lot of students who would love to continue their education in French, but because those French schools are not very attractive, because they're much smaller, oftentimes the schools that were given to Francophones were basically old schools that the Anglophone community did not want anymore. It's just a fact. But when you have a French school that's been built decades ago, that doesn't have a gymnasium, I mean, you can love French as much as you want. You maybe want to have your kids learn French as much as you want, but at the end of the day, if they want to have a hockey team, they'll go to the other school. Yes, we need to invest in that, absolutely. Mr. Lessard and Mr. Kiti, earlier you spoke about the recruitment of students, and there's an issue regarding discrimination. You're right. But more specifically, how do you assess the work accomplished by Canadian Consular Services abroad for students and workers? Earlier, Mr. Kiti, you said that it was important to better prepare the newcomers to Canada, but what can we do? Should we improve consular services? Answer. As I said earlier, it's been 25 years this year that I've arrived in Canada. And 25 years ago, it was much harder to come to Canada. And things have improved a bit since. Yet, there's a lot of work to do. And the question I have is the following. What is the work you could do, honorable members with us, is is there a preference for some countries? There are some visas that are given out more easily to some countries. In some countries, well, for some countries, it seems that it's that there's discrimination. If that is the case, we need to improve things. Now, in how we prepare applications, we need to work on this, all of us together, provinces, the federal government, communities, in order to better prepare the applicants and these applications. Mr. Sarr, your comments on this? I agree with my colleague. There are a lot of agencies, actually, who abuse the system. And I think that when we all work together, we also need to make sure that the information available is straightforward. You visit the website, it's not clear. Sometimes you have to pay somebody to help you out, and sometimes these people are defrauded. As well, says Mr. Guity, we need to benefit as much as possible from those consular services. They can help us tremendously. Thank you. I see that there are only 10 seconds left, so I'll give those 10 seconds to the chairperson. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Boulris. Well, we had informally agreed that we would extend the session that was scheduled to end about 10 minutes ago. So we agreed to finish by 1:45. So I'll give 2.5 minutes to Mr. Lehoux first. You have 2.5 minutes. Go ahead. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for being with us today.
Mr. Guity, you're a consultant. We've talked about students often, but you also mentioned the issue of workers that might be very interested in coming here as well. I also heard Mr. Sarr talk about some of the issues related to fraud because there are too many immigration consultants. What could we do better? How can we work together better? We understand that some people are abusing the system, and that doesn't help improve it. Do you have any suggestions on this? I believe there's an echo. Is everything okay? Here's what I recommend is to get closer to diplomatic representation. For example, bridging programs, recognition programs for training. I know that Canada has accredited doctors to guarantee the health and safety of citizens. So I think if we had a system that could allow Canada to better validate people's files, we know that there are certain programs that can demonstrate rigor in the work. What if lawyers looked into this? That could facilitate this work and also reduce the incidence of fraud. But there's work to be done on that. Mr. Sarr, do you have something to add to this? Yes. When he talks about shortening timelines, that's something we can work on together, especially between the federal and provincial levels of government. You know, we have paper files, and the delays can last months, if not years, and certainly the pandemic hasn't helped. But I think this is part of how people use the system and abuse it. Quickly, if you don't have time to answer, maybe you can respond in writing. We talked about getting parents involved. You talked about inclusion and then the role that they can play. Is there something you can recommend on that front? Thank you, Mr. Lehoux. I have to respect the timing, so the next 2.5 minutes goes to Mrs. Kayabaka. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to thank our witnesses for being here today. With the 2 minutes that I have, I would like to go straight to Mr. Sarr and Mr. Guity. You talked about ways we can improve immigration services for international students that are coming from Francophone African countries. We saw that rejection rates for these countries are very high. In your opinion, can we draw a connection between the lack of resources for Francophones? What do you think about this? If you'll allow me, I would say that sometimes we have the impression that there is a turnover rate. I've seen extreme cases this year. Students that arrive and they get turned away at the airport, and then they have to pay another airfare, $2,000, $4,000, if they come in the middle of the session for the semester, for example. This year, there have been multiple incidents like this one. We can see it on the resources level. Do you think that we should increase the number of visas, visa offices on the African continent? Because Senegal takes care of 26 countries worth of applications. And this is my last question. I only have 1 minute. Do you think we should have an immigration unit that is francophone and dedicated to francophone immigration? I think this could help indeed. But this is a problem that we're experiencing throughout the world, and often our students go to other countries to travel in order to get a visa. But this could help indeed, especially when we work together between the provinces and the federal government. Thank you very much. This is all the time we have. My dear witnesses, Mr. Kitsy, Mr. Sarr, and Mr. Laberge, please know that any information you think we should have access to can be sent in writing to the clerk. We will take note of it. The clerk will distribute it to all committee members. So any additional information you think that could complement our understanding of the situation is welcome. I would also like to thank all committee members. This has been a very interesting session. And that said, I would like to adjourn this meeting. Thank you to the witnesses and thank you to the chair.
Merci.